Although operating early jets off carriers had its challenges, it also brought operational advantages that navies were keen to take advantage of. For example, a jet required very little warming up and tuning compared to a piston engine and therefore less preparation time on the flight deck. A potentially even greater advantage was the lack of a large propeller spinning at high speed in front of the aircraft. Besides the obvious deck handling safety benefits, some aircraft designers and naval tacticians in Britain began to wonder if they could go a step further. The Fleet Air Arm were major fans of the powerful Vort Corsair. The Corsair had a 13-foot, 4-inch diameter Hamilton standard propeller, driven by a 2,000 horsepower double wasp. If the aircraft were taxiing along with the fuselage exactly horizontal, then there would be 7 feet and 5 inches between the centre of the propeller hub and the deck. Getting that great big spinning death blade down on the deck required a tall and strong landing gear that could absorb the forces of a 10,000 plus pound fighter hitting a solid surface at 90 miles an hour, without compressing so much that the propeller hit the deck or transferring so much of the force to the aircraft that a wing broke off. The exact weight of the Corsair landing gear is hard to come by, but it was in the region of 8 to 900 pounds. That was a good chunk of mass. When jets came along, they were very thirsty. 800 pounds would give a whole load of range benefits if lost, or better still, if replaced with fuel. And because jets needed sturdy tricycle landing gear that retracted, the weight of the system could be upwards of 1,500 pounds. So, following this line of thought, the Royal Aircraft Establishment realised that with no spinning propeller to get in the way, perhaps the cushioning effect of the landing gear could be achieved in some other way. Better still, without the need to retract the undercarriage, wings could be made thinner, resulting in further improvements to the aircraft's characteristics. So even before the war ended, the RAE had begun to experiment with concepts for landing gearless fighters. At a January 1945 conference, participants discussed several methods of landing and launching aircraft without wheels. Suggestions included operating the aircraft from soft ground or sand, a sprung deck, flexible material floating on water, a wire net, a trolley running along tracks, and wires stretched between towers on a ship, itself a variation of the US Navy's Brody system used on tank landing ships in World War II. Major F.M. Green, a leading aeronautical engineer formerly with the Royal Flying Corps, proposed landing a wheelless jet aircraft on a flexible carpet suspended by shock absorbers. Such a runway, coupled with the use of conventional arresting wires, could halt the aircraft with a minimum of run-out after touchdown. A carpet 150 feet long and 40 feet wide should be sufficient for a jet aircraft of about 8,000 pounds. Wear on the rubber surface would be extremely small, especially if the surface were kept wet. Subsequent work on the undercarriageless aircraft project was slow because the RAE was engrossed in testing advanced aircraft of its own and then seeking out and evaluating surrendered German aircraft. The flexible deck system was therefore not ready for testing until late 1947. And with everything extremely dangerous that the British Air Ministry was considering in this period, there was only one man for the job of testing it. Just after noon on the 29th of December 1947, Lieutenant Commander Eric Winkle Brown, a veteran carrier pilot, approached a flexible deck runway at Farnborough in a Sea Vampire fighter with the wheels retracted. As the twin-boom aircraft approached the carpeted area, the plane sank faster than had been anticipated, and Brown increased power to check the plane's downward motion. But because of the slow acceleration in response to the throttle of the jet engine, the aircraft kept sinking and struck the ramp at the end of the carpet. The arresting hook bounced up and locked, and the plane's tail booms were damaged, locking the control surfaces. The Sea Vampire bounced twice along the carpet, reached the end, and then struck the ground, badly damaged. Brown was uninjured, but it was an unpromising start. After that inauspicious first effort, several changes were made in the landing procedure, and on the 17th of March 1948, Brown made a perfect flexible deck landing in a Sea Vampire with wheels retracted. More landings followed at Farnborough, and then on the 3rd of November 1948, Brown landed on a flexible carpet installed on board the light carrier HMS Warrior. Warrior, recently returned from a loan to the Canadian Navy, was fitted with a flexible deck of a rubber-like material stretching 190 feet aft from her island structure. A single arresting wire was installed near the forward end of the flexible deck. A plane that caught the wire was pulled down onto the carpet and slowed to a halt with a run out of only a few feet. A crane then lifted the aircraft onto a trolley. The trolley was winched forward for lowering to the hangar deck by elevator or to the catapult for launching again. The tests on the Warrior were conducted from November 48 to May 49. More than 200 landings ashore and afloat were made by Fleet Air Arm and Royal Air Force pilots, as well as 3 US Navy test pilots, Donald Engen, Norm Cootant and John Norris. More on them later. There were no serious accidents. On occasion, a plane would miss the single arresting wire, hit the carpet and bounce into the air, then the pilot would simply fly around for another go. Evaluation of the tests indicated that the elimination of the undercarriage would represent a 4 to 5% saving in aircraft weight. This could lead to improved aircraft designs with a saving of an additional 5 or 6% of gross weight. Translated into performance for carrier-type aircraft, that meant a 45-minute increase in endurance or a speed increase between 17 and 23 miles an hour. On the 12th of November 1953, the third prototype Hawker Seahawk was launched from a slotted tube catapult derived from that used to launch V-1 flying bombs. It was then successfully landed on the flexible deck, making it the only aircraft in the program to both take off and land without landing gear. The Navy, however, concluded that there was no point in continuing with the trial. The fundamental issue was that a wheelless aircraft would require a flexible deck everywhere it went. It couldn't land at conventional airfields or come aboard carriers not provided with a flexible deck without causing major damage. The costs of rigging airfields ashore with flexible decks and developing a new generation of aircraft to take maximum advantage of the concept were not justified for the possible results gained. As engines became more powerful, the weight saving also became less attractive. Ahead of the results of and conclusions from the tests, Supermarine had developed and offered the Fleet Air Arm their Type 543 carrier fighter, which they claimed gained performance from the 33% weight saving of having no landing gear. This interesting-looking aircraft died with the Navy's interest in the concept. In the US, both the Air Force and the Navy read the reports from their test pilots, including one from Donald Engen, later Vice Admiral Engen, that stated categorically that flexible decks were not worth pursuing. The powers that be apparently concluded that the Royal Navy weren't doing it right, and good old American engineering would make the system work. The Air Force was concerned that a surprise attack by Soviet aircraft on its bases in Europe would fatally cripple the tactical fighter-bomber force assigned to support US ground forces stationed there. One way to avoid being caught by surprise was to have fighter-bombers that could take to the air immediately on warning. To that end, the USAF planned to mount combat-loaded F-84G Thunderjets on mobile launchers designed for Matador cruise missiles. These attack aircraft would be more effective if they were stripped of their landing gear, and so the USAF examined the flexible deck concept as a means to recover such zero-length launch planes. The F-84 landed at 135 knots, which is a good 44 knots faster than the Vampire. The USAF's version of the flexible deck was 400 feet long to compensate, but the extra length did not protect the pilot of the first test flight, George Rodney, from severe injury. The engineering problem faced by the project team had been to find a way to retract the F-84G's flaps, which would be down during the aircraft's approach once the plane's tail had caught. The engineers had feared that bringing the plane down on the rubber deck with its flaps extended might ruin the deck, and so they had installed a system to pull the flaps up into the wings as soon as the plane caught the arresting wire. Unfortunately, on the first attempt, this system worked even though the plane didn't catch the wire, with the result that the F-84G bounced twice on the mat and then crashed heavily beyond it. Though a second attempt to land an F-84G on the mat was successful in December 1954, the pilot was violently thrown around in the cockpit and also badly injured. Both pilots suffered broken backs. The USAF therefore abandoned testing. The Navy, proceeding in parallel with the Air Force, had Grumman modify 2 F9F-7 Cougars for tests planned in early 1955. Both aircraft retained their landing gear and were re-engined with more powerful J48P8 motors. A ventral surface was added beneath the fuselage, the unpainted part on this picture. The intention was to soften the landing as a flat surface wouldn't be hitting the flexible deck. Once the aircraft was down, it would be craned onto a special dolly to allow it to be moved around. The brakes on the dolly connected to the brake controls of the Cougar so that the pilot could taxi prior to launch. It was an update of the system employed in the Sea Vampire. Company test pilot John Norris made the first landing. None of the modifications worked, and it thus became evident to him that the fundamentals of physics on the pilot's body were the same in all the air forces in the free world. In an effort to protect himself from injuries of the kind suffered by his Air Force counterparts, Norris and Grumman developed a rigid torso harness, a form-fit helmet with wraparound jaw protector, and a device for rigidly connecting the helmet to the harness. John Norris then made 10 further successful landings, and he collected his extra hazard bonus. Wanting to check that their contractor was doing things right, the Navy then dispatched their own test pilot, John Moore, to land the undercarriage-free Cougar. He saw the special safety rig and shortly thereafter observed that it was calculated that with the harness on and the life jacket inflated, the buoyancy was significantly negative. Hence, in the event of a ditching and following the pilot's safe egress from the aeroplane, he had to remove the life jacket, remove the parachute, remove the protective harness, reinstall the life jacket, and then inflate it. It was expected that this could be accomplished while the pilot was standing on the bottom of Chesapeake Bay. Sarcasm aside, Moore made a number of successful landings on the 80 by 570 foot flexible deck. Like the British system, the one constructed for use at Pax River was composed of 686 80-foot-long, 30-inch diameter air-filled rubber sausages. The bags were supposed to be soft, but they were in fact as hard as rocks. They were stretched across the deck's base and topped by rubberized fabric mats that held them in place. The Navy's deck, again like its counterpart in Farnborough, had a front ramp also composed of air-filled bags and a single arresting wire. To provide a slippery surface for landings, a compound of silicon and water was applied to the deck surface by crewmen with swabs. In total, 24 such landings were made to test out the system before it was once again abandoned, and thus countless pilots were unknowingly saved the back-breaking agony of wheels-up landings. Thus ended a most interesting and totally unproductive development in carrier aviation.